Lucia was the kind of person that most barely noticed, but anyone who stopped for a second to observe her carefully would notice something rare, a quiet strength in her eyes and a hope that refused to die, even in the midst of the harshest routine. At 17, while other girls planned their birthday parties or discussed the colors of their fashionable backpacks, Lucia carried a bucket, a broom, and the weight of a life that was never easy. Orphaned from a very young age, she had been through so many shelters that she had lost count, each with different rules, new faces, cold beds, and empty promises. But she never complained. He never rebelled. From an early age, he understood that expecting compassion was a waste of time. So instead of complaining, he chose to get up every day with a simple purpose: to continue. She found in that job as a cleaner at an elite school the chance to, who knows, one day transform her own history. It was his first job with a formal contract. She cleaned the school's wide hallways, the bathrooms filled with bright mirrors, and the rooms where young people her age learned about a world she had not yet accessed. Her world of possibilities, opportunities, and open doors. But Lucia did not let herself be discouraged. Whenever she finished scrubbing a floor, she would raise her head. His eyes were looking for something beyond dirt, a better future. His clothes were simple. A worn blue uniform that did not hide his thinness and the hard life he had already lived. Her hair was always tied up, her skin marked by the sun and effort, and a look that, despite everything, she still dreamed of. He dreamed big. He dreamed of studying, on having a degree. To be someone that people respected not for what he wore, but for what he was. Even surrounded by students with expensive cell phones and designer backpacks, she walked the corridors with dignity. It was impossible not to notice the crossed looks, the muffled giggles, and even the mean comments that escaped when they thought she was not listening. Some students made fun of her clothes, the way she walked, her humble origins. For them, Lucia was just the cleaning girl, someone who did not deserve attention, much less respect. But Lucia knew who it was. He knew what he carried inside him. She did not allow the wickedness of others to plant roots in her heart. Deep down, I believed that life could change. I just needed a chance. Every day, she arrived early. Even before the sun rose, he was already at the back of the school, putting on his gloves and separating the cleaning products. He worked in silence, observing everything. The teachers rushed by, the students laughing in the courtyards, the classes taking place behind doors that, for the time being, remained closed to her. And even so, there was a twinkle in his eyes. There was a flame that would not go out. Lucia wanted no mercy. I wanted opportunity. And that made all the difference. Sometimes, when work allowed, she would stop for a few minutes in front of the school library, admiring that space full of books. I dreamed of being able to enter, sit down, learn. He dreamed of new notebooks, tests, intellectual challenges. He dreamed of what seemed impossible, but he never stopped dreaming. Because inside it, there was something that no difficulty could destroy: hope. And it was precisely this hope, added to her quiet courage, that would set her on an unexpected path, a path where everything would change. Lucia's life was about to take a turn that no one, not even her, could have predicted. If you believe that simple people can star in great stories, leave the like and subscribe to the channel to follow everything. Lucia's routine at the elite school was more than arduous. It was cruel. Not just the long hallways she scrubbed every day, or the toilets she spent hours cleaning until every tile gleamed. What really weighed was the environment that surrounded her. An environment where, for many, she was invisible, or worse, a target. The rich students, with their perfectly arranged hair, impeccable uniforms, and state-of-the-art cell phones, did not miss the chance to remind Lucia of the place that, according to them, she should occupy as low as possible. With looks of disdain, they laughed as she passed. Some poked each other, whispered, and let out muffled laughter. But others did not bother to hide their derision. They mocked his clothes, always simple and repeated. Some called her a little cleaner in a mocking tone, as if that dignified work was a reason for shame. When they knew she was around, they made a point of purposely dirtying the bathroom, toilet paper on the floor, lipstick in the sinks, even food scattered in the corners, all with a single objective: to humiliate her. And as if that wasn't enough, they started filming her in secret. They recorded while she cleaned on her knees, while carrying heavy buckets, or while lowering her head when she heard a provocation. They posted the videos on social networks with malicious captions full of irony. In the comments, other students laughed, liking and sharing as if it were a harmless joke. But for Lucia, each like was a stab. Even without showing it, it hurt. Still, she endured it, in silence, with downcast eyes, yes, but a firm heart, because she knew that it was not what defined her. It was as if inside her there was a force that did not allow external cruelty to destroy her essence. Even when I cleaned a freshly soiled bathroom on purpose, I took a deep breath, picked up the cloth, and kept going. He didn't cry in front of anyone. He never answered. She never allowed herself to descend to the level of those who humiliated her, perhaps because I had learned since I was little that dignity is not asked for, it is carried. The school on the outside was beautiful. Manicured gardens, imposing architecture, modern rooms. But for Lucia, that place was a daily proving ground, a constant test of emotional endurance. There, she faced not only the dirt on the floor, but the dirt of intentions. And yet every day she was there. Punctual, dedicated, respectful. There was a harshness in the way those girls treated her, as if they wanted to make it clear that she would never be part of that world. And the saddest thing was that some of them didn't even see her as people. It was as if she was just part of the scenery, the person who cleans, the one who disappears when they enter the room, the one who should never be heard. But Lucia heard everything. Every evil laugh, every nickname whispered loud enough to hurt. She kept it, not as a grudge, but as fuel. Sometimes she needed to step away for a moment. He imitated a break to drink water, washed his face in secret, and came back as if nothing had happened. It was in these moments that his strength was most revealed, because inside, what anyone in his situation would most want was to escape. But Lucia did not run away. She remained. She knew that all that contempt said more about others than it did about her, and despite everything he maintained his posture. He walked steadfastly, showing no weakness. Sometimes a teacher would greet her with a discreet wave. Sometimes a younger student would smile shyly, but most ignored it. The difference is that she didn't let herself be erased by that. I had learned that not everyone values those who carry the world on their backs, and even though I was young, I already knew that pain could be support and humiliation, a step. Even on the worst days, there was something that wouldn't go out about her. Maybe it was that image stored in her mind, of herself sitting at a desk, notebook open, being called by name by a teacher. Perhaps it was the memory of her interrupted childhood, her postponed dreams, and the silent promise she had made to herself, that her story would not end as it began. She didn't know how or when, but he believed, and that was what kept her going. That heavy routine, marked by the indifference of some and the derision of others, seemed to repeat itself endlessly. But life has a peculiar way of turning pages when you least expect it, and it was on one of those seemingly ordinary days, when everything indicated that nothing would change, that fate took its first step towards change. A silent but powerful step, capable of completely transforming not only Lucia's story, but the way everyone around her would see her. Behind the calloused hands, there was an entire universe that no one saw. While scrubbing the corridors and collecting crumpled papers from the empty rooms, Lucia carried inside her something that could not be cleaned, not erased, and could not be thrown away. Dreams. They were not grandiose dreams in the sense that most of the girls in that school understood. She didn't think about trips to Europe, designer bags, or luxury parties. What Lucia wanted did not shine on the outside, but burned on the inside. She wanted a chance, a single open door, not to flee but to enter. During breaks in service, when the sound of laughter died down and the corridors were empty, Lucia found refuge among the dusty shelves of the library. It was a beautiful modern library, but many of the older books lay forgotten in the corners. It was in these volumes, with yellowed pages and worn covers, that she immersed herself whenever she could. She sat on the floor between one shelf and another, hidden from the view of those who would not understand what a cleaning lady was doing there. He read in a hurry, hungry, as if devouring something rare, and it wasn't for lack of tiredness. Even exhausted, even after hours of carrying buckets and scrubbing floors, her eyes lit up when they found a new word, an explanation about the human body, a story of someone who won. She didn't just read, she absorbed it. He memorized technical terms, names of diseases, symptoms and causes. I gradually understood how the human organism worked, and each discovery increased my desire to learn even more. There was no one to teach, no one to correct or praise. But she kept going, because inside her there was a certainty that no one could tear away, that she had been born for something greater. And it wasn't pride, it was purpose. Lucia dreamed of being a doctor, not to gain status or show off. She dreamed of being a doctor because she wanted to understand the pain of others. She wanted to help those who, like her, had already felt abandonment in their skin. He knew that if he ever managed to put on a white coat, it wouldn't erase his story, but he would make sense of it. I wanted to look someone in the eye and say, I understand you with authority, not because I read it in a book, but because I lived it in my skin. I wanted to treat, heal, listen, welcome. I wanted to be on the other side, not for revenge, but for mission. There were days when, while mopping the floor of a room, she found herself watching a class through the half-open door. From time to time, the teacher would explain something out loud, and she would stop for seconds, motionless, as if that moment were a gift. It was quick, discreet, but it was enough to rekindle the flame. Even standing with her uniform dirty and her hands rough from cleaning products, she didn't see herself as less. He saw himself as someone on the way, and that was what made her so unique. While many of her age were distracted by social networks or passing dramas, she daydreamed about cellular structures, diagnoses, shifts, and emergencies. I dreamed of a badge on my chest, of a signature on a prescription, of the first time someone would say, Dr. Lucia. And as far away as that seemed, she didn't doubt it. There was no luxury, no promises. But there was something more powerful than any wealth, an awakened mind. She knew that knowledge could be a bridge, and even though no one had invited her to cross it, she was determined to build her own steps. One book at a time, one peak at a time. Each new piece of information he assimilated was a brick in this silent and persistent construction. Lucia did not want more than necessary, and that was precisely what made her stand out in a world where everyone seemed to seek excesses. She wanted a wallet, a notebook, a blackboard in front of her. I wanted time to study, to ask, to grow. I didn't seek status, I sought preparation. And that, deep down, was what made her so dangerous to those who underestimated her. Because she carried a kind of power that cannot be taken away, that of believing even without applause, even without witnesses. And though her days were hard, she knew that each of them was paving a path. The school, even though it was the scene of humiliations, was also a place where his dreams took shape. There was something almost ironic about that. While most of the students passed by without valuing what they had, Lucia, invisible to her eyes, even valued the silence between one class and another. That structure that seemed so unreachable was for her a temple of possibilities. At night, when she returned to the small room where she lived, still with the smell of disinfectant impregnated on her skin, she opened one of the books she managed to borrow. She studied in dim light, often struggling with sleep. And yet when he woke up, it was as if his mind was stronger, because she was planting. Even without knowing when the harvest would come, she planted, day after day, with a stubborn, almost defiant faith. It was not always easy to maintain hope. The contempt she felt at school, the looks that crossed her as if she were transparent, the hidden laughter, all this weighed on her. But she had learned to convert pain into focus. I didn't want to prove anything to anyone. She wanted to prove it to herself. He wanted to look in the mirror one day and see reflected the fruit of his perseverance. And as much as she was still just a cleaning lady in the eyes of so many, she knew who she was. He knew his value. I knew of his courage. And he carried that as armor. He also knew that the walls that seemed insurmountable sometimes opened up for those who did not give up. And Lucia definitely wouldn't give up, because while many lived, to look she lived to be. His path was not paved with ease, but it was being trodden with dignity. And with each step he climbed in silence, the closer the moment was when everything would change. A moment that she didn't know when it would arrive, but that deep down she felt was approaching. The sky was clear that afternoon, with light clouds sliding lazily between the school buildings. The sound of childish laughter mingled with the distant noise of whistles and hurried footsteps. It was an ordinary day. Routine. The grass in the courtyard, still damp from morning irrigation, reflected the sun's rays, and the director's daughter twirled alone around a small tree, her blue dress moving like a miniature fan, a distracted child, oblivious to everything, enchanted by his own dance. Lucia passed by with the bucket of water, and the cloth twisted in her hand, her eyes tired but always attentive. It was a snap, dry, strange, a sound out of place. In seconds the world changed color. One of the metal supports of the structure, next to the court at the old corroded and forgotten, began to creak. First light, almost a lament, then a sharp hiss, as if the school itself were screaming. The iron gave way, leaning in a heavy and inevitable movement. A shadow was cast on the ground, swallowing part of the courtyard. The first voices came in. Chorus, short screams, interspersed with panic. Teachers, students, staff, everyone noticed, but no one moved. It was as if time had frozen at the exact moment the structure began to fall. A couple of seconds that lasted an eternity. The director's daughter was still there, spinning innocently, her eyes fixed on the sky, not noticing the impending danger, and the iron collapsed too quickly. That's when Lucia moved. Without thinking, without measuring, without hesitating, the body responded before the mind. He dropped the bucket, slipped in his own steps, and fired. The screams behind her echoed, but they no longer mattered. The only thing he saw was the child in front of him, as helpless as he had once been. The time that others used to scare herself, she used to act. His feet tore the grass. His heart beat in his chest like a war drum, and then, in a last impulse, she threw herself in. The world seemed to fall silent. The weight of the impact came like thunder. Lucia threw herself on top of the girl and pushed her hard, diverting her from the fatal trajectory. In the next instant, the iron plummeted. A dry, violent rumble. Dust, pieces of wood, shards of glass. Everything flew. When the dust settled, a heavy silence took over the courtyard. The girl was crying, scratched but unharmed. Lucia was fallen, her body partially under the rubble, panting. There was no visible blood, but there was pain. A dull, deep pain that radiated down his arm and back. Eyes closed, teeth clenched. Still live, still firm. For a few seconds no one moved. Everyone was still paralyzed, but now for another reason. For the first time, eyes were on her. Not as someone who observes a dirty uniform or an invisible figure, but as someone who really sees someone who matters. Lucia, the woman who had always gone unnoticed, was now the center of everything. The director crossed the courtyard in despair. He took his daughter in his arms, inspected her whole, trembling. The girl stammered words between sobs, pointing to Lucia. There was no doubt. She was alive because of that woman. And with that realization, the director looked up and found her face for the first time. Not the cleaning lady's face, but the woman's face. Other employees approached. Teachers, students. One of them ran to the infirmary. Another called an ambulance. The whispers began running over each other. No one fully understood what had just happened. They only knew that in the blink of an eye, the invisible hierarchy of that school had been shaken. Some students were standing, motionless, looking at Lucia as if they were seeing her for the first time. There was admiration, incredulity, even a certain discomfort, because it was uncomfortable to admit that the person ignored daily had just done what no one had the courage to do. It was disconcerting to realize that this woman, so accustomed to walking in the shadows, was now light. FEME. Ambulance arrived quickly. The noise of the siren seemed to bring everyone back to reality. Lucia was carefully placed on the stretcher. He was in pain, but he was conscious. He didn't complain. He didn't cry. He just looked around, as if he was still processing everything. As if not even she herself could explain the force that propelled her at that moment. But she knew. It was instinct. It was courage. It was love. As the ambulance drove away, the school remained silent. The board closed its doors for a few hours. The damaged structure was isolated with safety tapes. Students were dismissed early. There was an air of shock in the room, a restlessness that hung in the air. For the first time in a long time, Lucia was not invisible. And that bothered me. It bothered because it revealed how wrong everyone was. At dusk, groups formed on the school's social networks. Videos began to circulate. Someone had recorded the moment of the accident, and there she was, running with the cloth still in her hand, rushing like lightning at the child, saving him seconds before impact. The video was viewed hundreds of times in a few minutes, then thousands, and with it came recognition. Comments. Arose compliments, tributes, but also questions. Who was that woman? How could no one know her? How had they ignored someone like that for so long? The director spent the night awake, the image of her daughter holding her arms mixed with the sound of the iron falling and the memory of Lucia's thin figure on the floor. He was not a cruel man. He was just someone who, like many, had become accustomed to not seeing, and now, confronted with the truth, he saw clearly how much he had failed. The next morning, school looked different. The walls remained the same. The students' uniforms had not changed. The corridors still smelled of disinfectant. But there was something in the air, a collective restlessness, a quiet murmur that ran through the rooms. Everyone knew what had happened. Everyone had seen the video, and everyone was waiting. They didn't know exactly what, but they waited, as if something new was about to begin. Lucia, still in the hospital, rested under light medication. The bandaged arm, some abrasions. No serious fracture, no permanent damage. But what hurt the most was not physical. It was the weight of the moment, the repercussion, the sudden attention. For the first time, people were looking at her. And that was both frightening and liberating. The flowers began to arrive. Letters, tickets, even chocolates. Some students left messages at the hospital. Teachers sent messages. One of them wrote saying that he never forgot to see Lucia standing at the door of the room, her eyes shining at the blackboard. Others, more shy, just thanked him. It was as if in silence they were asking for forgiveness, but it wasn't forgiveness she needed. What Lucia wanted from the beginning was to be seen, not as a heroine, not as a martyr, but as a person, as someone with dreams, abilities, ambitions. And at that moment, for the first time, I felt that the invisible wall was beginning to crack. There was still no certainty of what would come next, but one thing was clear. Nothing would be the same as before. Because the courage that moved her at that decisive moment also began to move the world around her, and something was about to happen. The director was a practical man, accustomed to numbers, results, performance, but there, in front of that story, he felt the ground shake under his own values. How was it possible for someone so present to have gone unnoticed for so long? And, more, how could someone who carried so much on his shoulders still be able to find the strength for a gesture so pure, so immediate, so human? That was why, days later, he gathered everyone in the auditorium. Teachers, students, employees. There was a nervousness in the air, as if everyone felt that something big was about to happen. Lucia was there, shy at the back of the room, trying to curl up between the chairs. But this time, the eyes followed her. Some with respect, others with guilt, many with admiration. The director took the stage and spoke, not with the usual bureaucratic tone, but with a choked, slower voice, loaded with emotion. He described what happened in the courtyard. He spoke of the fright, the impact, the courage, but it didn't stop there. He said that when he tried to understand who that girl was, he discovered more than he expected. He discovered someone who represents exactly what the school should value: integrity, effort, empathy. He said that Lucia was not only a heroine for that act, but for everything she had been facing in silence for years. And then, in front of everyone, he announced what no one expected: a full scholarship, complete. Lucia would have access to all the courses, all the activities, all the materials, without paying a dime. But there was more. The scholarship was for life as long as she wanted to study there. And if she wanted to continue later, he would make sure to help her get into whatever university she chose. The announcement caused a thick silence, as if the air had grown denser for a moment. Then came the applause, slowly at first, like a shy wave that gains strength. And then suddenly the whole auditorium was on its feet, clapping, crying. Some students hid their faces. Others looked at the ground. It was as if they were looking at themselves for the first time, and they didn't like what they saw, because they realized how much they had ignored it, how much they had judged, how small they had been in the face of the silent greatness of someone who was always there. Lucia, in the midst of all that, remained motionless, the hot face, the teary eyes, the heart racing. For the first time, she didn't feel ashamed to be there. He did not feel that he occupied a place that did not belong to him. On the contrary, she felt perhaps for the first time that she was seen, which was at last recognized. From that day on, something changed, not only for her but for everyone around. The teachers started to call her by her name with more affection. Students who previously barely greeted her began to share spaces with her in a different way. But the most surprising thing was not that. That's what happened days later when Lucia, even with the recent glow that now illuminated her name in the school corridors, Lucia did not allow herself to forget where she came from, nor who still depended on her. The scholarship was an unexpected gift, a turning point that could, yes, change everything. But it did not erase the urgent needs of the present. In the shelter where she lived, other younger girls still looked at her with hope, as if waiting for the strength she lacks from someone. Food, clothes, toilet paper, soap, none of it sprang up by magic. The money he earned from cleaning was still essential to keep the little they had working. Therefore, even with her full-time studies guaranteed, Lucia made a decision that few understood. She would continue cleaning the school. Now his mornings were busy in the classrooms, and his afternoons in the corridors he already knew so well. The uniform changed, but the routine did not let up. I left home before sunrise, shared my morning bread with the other girls in the shelter, took the same full bus, faced the same sultry heat, the same steps. But now, after class, he exchanged his backpack for the bucket, the pen by the broom, the painting by the cloth. And while her colleagues went home, to rest, to social networks and afternoon snacks, she continued to rub tiles. At first, everything seemed out of step. The leap between cleaning the floor and solving an equation was bigger than anyone could have imagined. In the first classes, he sat in the back, as he always did, and tried to blend in. But now she couldn't hide anymore. The fame of the courtyard was still fresh, and this attracted glances from all sides. Some were of true respect, but others came loaded with cynicism, crooked smiles, disguised whispers, that kind of comment that seems harmless but hurts deeply. It was as if many did not accept that a cleaning lady shared the same desk or wrote in the same notebook as them. The tests came, and with them the first wave of frustration. There were subjects that she did not master, subjects that I had not been able to follow before, due to lack of time, access, structure. Questions that seemed written in another language. The feeling of being too late to compete with others was cruel. She read, reread, took notes, but did not always understand. And when the teacher asked, her fingers hesitated. Sometimes her silence was interpreted as ignorance, other times as disinterest. Neither of the two things was fair, but Lucia had faced silence many times. He knew that the noise of contempt would always be there, but it didn't have to be louder than his will. So even when she made a mistake, even when she got confused or left a blank answer, she continued. I arrived earlier, asked more. I read it secretly in the breaks. He rewrote the notebook at home in the dim light of a lamp hanging by an improvised wire. Every hit, no matter how small, was celebrated in silence. Each good note was like climbing a new step, and to her, Each step was worth like gold. During the afternoon cleaning, while scrubbing the tiles in the canteen or removing hardened gum from the desks, the content of the classes kept spinning. In my head. It was as if, between the noise of the squeegee and the strong smell of the disinfectant, she passed on formulas, names, dates. Work, which was previously automatic, has become a time of reflection, a learning interval disguised as routine. The days were long, and the body aches became constant. My knees, feet, back hurt. Fatigue was a persistent companion, but she didn't complain. She knew that there, in that effort, she was planting something that no one could see yet, but that she felt growing inside. Trust. The idea that he was capable, even when everyone said otherwise. That he deserved to be there, even if some turned up their noses. Over time, he began to stand out in some subjects. History, for example, seemed to run through his veins. He had a keen memory for dates and events. The teacher noticed this and discreetly began to encourage her. He lent books, suggested podcasts, recommended movies. It was as if in that silent gesture he said to her, "I see you." And for Lucia, that was enough. Mathematics was still a challenge, and in chemistry class the symbols seemed to dance in chaotic choreography before their eyes. But that didn't stop her. During breaks in cleaning, he asked the inspectors for help. Some teachers, moved, started to stay a little beyond working hours to ask quick questions, even when the day already seemed over. Gradually, she began to reap the invisible fruits of courage, the empathy of those who had previously only ignored her. But the mocking looks did not disappear overnight. There were still those who laughed when she got a word wrong or stumbled while reading aloud. Some still made low jokes when they saw their uniform stained with bleach in the late afternoon. And that hurt. It hurt more than any physical weight, but it also served as fuel. There was no more room for giving up. The road was difficult, but it was no longer dark. Now she saw the path ahead. When he received the first report card of the semester, his hands trembled. He did not expect miracles. I just hoped I hadn't failed. But when she opened the envelope, her heart raced. The grades were above average, and there, on that plain sheet of paper, was a silent declaration of victory. It wasn't just about numbers. It was about persistence, about not giving in to pain, about carrying on even when everything seemed to push her back. The routine was exhausting. Those were days when he barely had time for himself. Dinner at the shelter was often a stale bread with thin tea, the bed, an old mattress covered with a borrowed sheet. But the younger girl's eyes, now full of pride, made every renunciation worthwhile. They wanted to be like her, and that gave meaning to everything. Even with the difficulties, Lucia began to dream. And they were not small dreams. I wanted more. I wanted medicine. I wanted to understand how the body worked, how to save lives. The image of the girl he had saved in the courtyard never left his mind. I felt that there was something greater there, a calling, a purpose that she now dared to imagine. Gradually, people's views changed. Those who laughed began to fall silent. Those who mocked began to wonder how she did it. Because Lucia, even after cleaning the school floor, was still able to climb the board and solve problems that many did not understand. It was as if at last they were discovering that intelligence has no uniform, that dignity is not measured by status, and that the true force, the one that moves the world, often hides where no one looks. But Lucia did not seek applause, nor recognition. I just wanted to move on, one step at a time. And now that she had learned to walk with her eyes firmly on the future, there was no turning back, because despite the daily weight, there was something growing inside her stronger, every morning. And that's exactly what made a new opportunity on a rainy day while I was collecting the garbage in the hallway. While most of the students went home after classes, Lucia exchanged her school uniform for the cleaning apron. The smell of disinfectant no longer bothered as much as before. It was now part of the routine she had chosen to embrace. Mornings were filled with subjects she barely understood at first. The technical terms, the long texts, the complex calculations, it was all daunting new territory. She sat at her first desks, attentive, writing down every word as if the pen were her only weapon to survive in that new world. But not every battle was visible on the chalkboard. The difficulties went beyond the school content. Some teachers, out of compassion or disbelief, looked at her with that mixture of pity and skepticism. But the worst came from his own colleagues. There was still the muffled laughter when she made a mistake when reading aloud or asked a question that was too simple. They were looks that spoke more than words. She was not from there, she did not belong there. And this Lucia felt with every cell of her body. Even so, he remained firm. Each hit was celebrated in silence, as if hiding a treasure. The first blue. Grade in mathematics was a milestone, not because it is tall, but because it is conquered at the cost of sleepless nights, hours of standing, cleaning corridors, and then studying under the dim light of the shelter's lamp. When her grades improved, when she started to answer with more confidence, when a teacher praised an essay of hers in public, something began to change. Not for everyone, and maybe it would never change for everyone, but for her it was enough. However, as Lucia grew inside, some masks around began to fall off. The indifference of certain colleagues turned into something more bitter. That kind of envy that disguises itself as kindness, but bites in the back. They began to whisper louder. They insinuated that she was only there out of pity, that this scholarship was just a gesture of charity, not a recognition of merit. And Lucia listened. He pretended not, but he listened. He kept everything in a silent corner of his chest. One day, when she opened her backpack, she found the torn papers of an important job that had taken her days to complete. It was a science project with hand-drawn illustrations, texts researched during breaks, and in the few minutes of rest. It was destroyed. There was no note. There was no witness. But she knew. And it hurt. It hurt more than any low grade, more than any mockery. Because there it wasn't just paper that had been torn. It was her attempt to be seen as an equal. His hope that, with effort, he would be able to win inside the system. She cried. Not in public. He hid behind the school building, where the employees kept brooms and buckets. He sat down between the buckets and let the tears flow in silence. But he did not give in. He took new sheets, redid the work. He spent the night redrawing, rewriting, and he delivered it the next day as if nothing had happened. That was his answer, not in words but in attitude. If they expected her to give up, they didn't know her. The more they pushed it down, the higher it rose, not out of pride, but out of necessity. I knew I couldn't stop. That stopping meant accepting the place that others had chosen for her, and Lucia had already understood that she did not need to occupy the space offered to her, but to create her own. If there were people hoping to see her fail, she couldn't give that pleasure to anyone. He learned to filter the voices, distinguishing constructive criticism from disguised attacks. He learned to walk with steady eyes, even when the ground shook. Every day was a test, not only at school but from the resistance itself. Lucia understood that her path was different, steeper, more lonely, and even so, he didn't stop. He was beginning to realize that he was becoming stronger than he had ever imagined. The afternoon cleaning, once a burden, now became almost therapeutic. It was at that time, with his hands full and his mind in silence, that he processed the days, learning that he organized his ideas, that he consolidated everything he had absorbed. The teachers, little by little, began to notice, not only for the improvement in grades, but for the rare dedication, for the discipline that drew attention. Some have come to treat her with genuine respect. Others would still take time, stuck in stereotypes that do not give way easily. But Lucia no longer demanded acceptance. She just needed one chance, and this one she built herself every day. She didn't want to be the best in her class to prove something to someone, but to ensure her own survival. Studying for her was as vital as breathing, and even with all the stumbling blocks, the feeling of learning, of evolving, was addictive. He began to frequent the library in his spare time, to borrow books, to make notes in extra notebooks. I discovered the pleasure of learning for the sake of learning, of understanding how the world worked, of deciphering what once seemed unattainable. What at first was just a desperate attempt to change his life now became a passion. She had found something that no one could take away from her, but the surrounding environment was still hostile. Some students continued the silent game of sabotage. They hid materials, created rumors, mocked the repeated clothes or the simple snack that Lucia took from the shelter. It was a constant wear and tear, a cold war in which the enemy never revealed itself head-on. And yet, she kept going. He carried a kind of courage that didn't make noise, but that resisted everything. And maybe that was what bothered her so much, the fact that she didn't give up, that even without resources, without applause, without visible allies, she persisted. The pain he felt in silence became a focus. What seemed to be just resistance became fuel. Not that it didn't hurt, and a lot. But it was no longer a pain that paralyzed. It was a pain that pushed. Each attack, each veiled humiliation, each attempt to destabilize her became a step. Over time, she no longer cried so much, or maybe she had learned to cry inside. What mattered was to continue, because deep down she already understood that there was something bigger waiting for her, something he still couldn't name, but he called with force, and this strength grew with each new challenge. While some sank into their own arrogance, Lucia built her own path with stones that others threw at her. It was no longer just about studying or working. It was about proving to herself that she wasn't defined by her origin, by her clothes, by her history of abandonment. She was writing a new story, and even if no one else read it, she would continue to write. Because, at that moment, there was something being born inside her, something that could no longer be ignored, and that something would begin to take shape with an unexpected event, capable of transforming everything she thought was possible. Lucia's silent effort, which had previously seemed invisible to the eyes of others, began to blossom irrefutably. As time went on, their grades, which once barely exceeded the average, became consistent and, in many cases, stood out at the top of their class. Not only did she master the content of the lessons, but she also demonstrated a genuine curiosity and an insatiable thirst for learning that went beyond the confines of the classroom. Each test, done with dedication, was one more piece in the construction of that new identity she was carving. She was no longer just the student who cleaned the hallways in the afternoon, but someone capable of discussing, questioning, and shining. The turning point began to emerge when the school announced the traditional science Olympiad, a challenge that brought together the most dedicated and intelligent students of the institution. Lucia signed up almost as an act of courage, not knowing what to expect but hoping to measure her progress in front of other students. The days leading up to the competition were intense. In addition to the exhausting routine of cleaning in the afternoon, she dedicated entire nights to reviewing content, extra research, simulations, and even educational videos that she could access on an old borrowed cell phone. The fatigue accumulated, but the willpower became even more intense. When the result finally came out, something changed forever. Lucia not only participated, but also won a medal, being one of the best placed in the Olympiad. It was a moment of validation, tangible proof that his dedication surpassed any prejudice or financial difficulty. The medal, gleaming and earned with sweat, has become a silent symbol of a personal revolution. Upon receiving the recognition, the shyness and suspicious looks that surrounded her began to turn into genuine respect. Not because of the merit of others, but because of the authentic brilliance that now emanated from her. A short time later, an even bigger surprise awaited her. Lucia was invited to represent the school at a national event for young scientists, an opportunity that for many would seem too distant, but which for her was almost a confirmation that she was on the right path. The school's director, a serious and reserved man, made a point of proudly presenting her at the opening ceremony of the event, mentioning her trajectory and highlighting the strength and commitment that led her there. Those words, simple and objective, echoed not only in the auditorium but within Lucia's own heart, who felt for the first time the true weight of public recognition. Meanwhile, the same students who had previously ignored or even despised her, the ones who whispered mean comments in the hallways, began to approach her differently. They began to ask for help to understand difficult subjects, to seek explanations for complex doubts, to beg for advice on how to improve in tests. The curious thing is that Lucia did not hold any resentments. On the contrary, She saw it as an opportunity to reaffirm that what really mattered was not to beat others, but to beat herself. Helping those who one day tried to overthrow her became, for her, a way to show that her victory was greater than any grudge. It was a gesture that came from the recognition that his journey was not about defeating opponents, but about breaking free from the invisible shackles that prejudice and low self-esteem had placed in his life. By reaching out, she transformed an environment that could be one of toxic competition into a space for collective learning and empathy. That new posture consolidated his growth, not only intellectually, but emotionally. The feeling that dominated Lucia was one of plenitude, that she was finally in the right place, not because she had changed who she was, but because she had discovered the power she had within herself. The medal and the invitation to the national event were only external, symbols of a much deeper transformation. The real achievement was in the fact that from then on, Lucia was no longer the girl who doubted herself, nor the invisible cleaning lady who tried to hide behind her functions. She had become a protagonist of her own story, someone who could look in the mirror and see a warrior ready for any challenge. The confidence, once fragile, now pulsated with an intensity that changed every gesture, every attitude, every step taken in the corridors of that school. It was impossible to deny that that victory was a game-changer, not only for her, but for everyone who knew her. The change in looks, in people's behavior, in the way teachers treated her, everything reflected a new reality. Lucia's academic success began to inspire other students who were also facing difficulties, showing that, regardless of the origin or situation, it was possible to overcome barriers. His trajectory came to be seen as a living example of the power of perseverance and determination. And even though the medal shone on her chest and the recognition echoed in every word of the director, what really moved Lucia was a silent certainty. The greatest victory would never be an award or a compliment, but the fact that she had proved, better to herself than to anyone, that she was capable of transcending limits. This certainty was consolidated with each challenge faced, with each night of study, with each class overcome. As long and arduous and sometimes lonely as the path was, there was something unshakable growing there, something that propelled his steps with immense and serene force at the same time. It was as if a new page was being written, full of possibilities and dreams that previously seemed too far away to achieve. And this page was just the beginning of a much larger chapter, where the challenges would continue, but now with a different protagonist. A protagonist who had discovered within herself a courage and a capacity that changed everything. And this awakening, this moment of rebirth, presented itself with a clarity that made it seem that the future, although still uncertain, held powerful and transformative surprises. Lucia's story resonates far beyond the walls of that school or the streets where she grew up. It represents, in every step and achievement, the silent struggle of so many people who face invisible prejudices, social barriers, and a host of challenges that many prefer to ignore. When looking at her trajectory, it is impossible not to wonder how many other Lucias there are out there, hidden in the shadows of judgment, underestimated by what they wear, the address they frequent, or the shy voice they use to ask for a chance. These Lucys may be cleaning floors, carrying bags, taking care of other people's houses, while feeding dreams that seem too distant to be touched, but that burn intensely in the chest. What Lucia's journey reveals, above all, is the strength of silent courage, the one that doesn't make noise, doesn't need applause, but that resists at every moment, even when everything around seems to conspire against it. It is a courage that is born of persistent hope, of the unwavering desire to change one's own history, no matter the size of the stone in the path or the weight of the suspicious gaze. Lucia did not wait for the world to recognize her. She recognized herself first, accepted her fears, her limitations, and turned it into fuel to move forward, to climb step by step, even when no one was watching her. The impact of this example is immense, because it forces us to reflect on the power we carry within us, and how much greater this can be than any external circumstance. The prejudice that judged Lucia by her appearance, the simplicity of her clothes, or the work she did, was not a real judgment. It was a projection of the insecurity of those who could not see beyond the surface. It teaches us that the true measure Of a person is not in the conditions in which he was born, but in the determination with which he faces each challenge, in the brightness he cultivates in his soul, and in the determination that does not give up in the face of difficulties. This story serves to break paradigms and reconfigure the way we look at the world and the people around us. How many times do we pass by someone without realizing the daily battle that person faces? How many times do we fail to value someone because their trajectory does not fit the social standards that we have learned to accept as normal? Lucia is a living invitation to break down these invisible barriers, to see the hidden potential in each individual, regardless of their origin, social class, or position. Lucia's courage also shows that true power lies in taking the lead in one's own life, in not allowing fear or doubt to be greater than the dream. It reminds us that the path can be difficult, that there will be days of tiredness, of hidden tears, of contrary voices trying to extinguish the flame, but that it is exactly at these times that the true character is revealed. Her story reinforces the importance of standing firm, valuing every small victory, and not letting the outside noise overshadow the inner voice that says, "I can." Lucia's example transcends her personal story and becomes a universal lesson for anyone who has ever felt invisible, unvalued, or incapable. It inspires us to seek within ourselves the same strength, the same persistence, and the same faith in the possibility of transformation. Each obstacle overcome, each achievement, no matter how small it may seem, is an affirmation that we are capable of changing not only our lives, but also the way the world sees us. This learning, deep and powerful, invites us to look beyond the superficial, to see human potential where many only see difficulties. It is a call for each one to recognize their intrinsic value and allow themselves to believe that, with determination, it is possible to rewrite their own destiny. Lucia's story echoes as a reminder that the greatest triumph lies in never giving up, in sticking with even when the path seems uncertain, and in understanding that true success is the one that is born of respect and self-love. The trajectory of this young cleaning lady who became an example is therefore a bridge that connects not only the past and the present, but that projects a living hope for the future. She didn't just overcome obstacles, she overcame prejudices, rescued her self-esteem and inspired change, becoming a beacon for all those who silently carry their dreams in the midst of difficulties. By observing what Lucia has achieved, it is clear that the power to transform lives is available to everyone as long as one has the courage to take the first step, even if that step seems too small to change the world. Thus, the question that pulsates under the surface of her story remains: how many other Lucys still wait to be seen, recognized, valued? How many incredible forces are being underestimated for lack of opportunity or for superficial judgments? The answer, if we look closely, lies within each of us, in the ability to look with empathy, to believe in hidden potential, and to embrace the transformative power of persistent hope and quiet courage. And it is in this perception that Lucia's true legacy resides, a message that surpasses generations and that is still alive, ready to inspire new journeys and new achievements. This story, inspired by real events, carries a force that may be much closer than we imagine. How many Lucias are there among us, hiding a giant inside, even if today they seem only a shadow in everyday life? Never underestimate a Lucia. She may be cleaning today, but she's a giant on the inside. And it is precisely this force that transforms lives, that moves mountains silently, and that in the end shows that what really matters is in what we carry, in our hearts and in the will to move forward. If this story touched your heart, this feeling deserves to be celebrated. Leave a like, because it is a sign that this message has found a special place within you, that the connection we built here was worth it. If you want, leave a comment saying this message was for me, or something that shows that you have come this far, because listening to and sharing these emotions is part of what keeps this exchange alive and true. And if you feel it makes sense, subscribe to the channel. Here is a space for stories that inspire, for those who want more than information. They want transformation. There is a video here on the side that tells a similar story, full of courage and overcoming. Click and stay with me there, because there is much more to discover, reflect and learn together. Each story is an invitation to look within, find that strength that is often hidden, and keep walking, step by step, towards what we know we can be.